Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Cradle conversation. My name is Laura Halpin. I am recording from Walnut Creek, California, the home of the Bay Miwoks. These Cradle conversations are intended to be something that holds us steady, something that's predictable and a source of comfort as we go through these times. And yet, with all of the comforting connotations of the word cradle, cradle is also the origin of something. And so it's my hope that together we can weave together a vision of something new, because whether or not it sounds comforting to go back to something, there is no going back. We're always moving forward, weaving together what we've learned. And so I want to welcome you into this place of community. I want to introduce my guest, Bunny McKenzie Mack, who uses they, them pronouns. Bunny is from Chicago, Illinois. They are a facilitator, an educator, and founder and managing director of the McKensiie MACK group, which is doing work around equity, raising consciousness, having conversations, and working at equity at the intersections of race, disability, class, sexual identity, and gender. And so it is really an honor, Bunny, to have you here in this conversation. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Laura?
I'm happy to be here. I'm thankful to have your company. How are you?
I'm happy to be here too, to have this conversation this morning. I'm not sure if you hear this bird in the background. There's a bird.
I can.
It's just like, just like going right now. So I think that is like I'm drawing energy from this bird right now. I'm happy to be outside.
And how are you doing?
I am doing probably as best it can be expected. And I know we had tried to sort of record this just now and it went out. So thank you for being so persistent, and for being so committed to us having this conversation, for all the folks that will be listening and watching this after the fact. But in that earlier conversation, I talked about how I think many of us don't want to say that we're not doing well, and it's sort of like that thing that happens in conversation where in passing someone asks you how you are and you're like, oh yeah, fine. And then, that sort of extends itself from you saying that to strangers to when people who actually are in your life, who you're close to, who you care about deeply, ask you how you are. And you're just like on that automatic responder. I'm fine. Everything is fine. I actually saw the other day, someone had posted a sign, and it's a sign in white. And I think it's here in Chicago, and I can't remember which neighborhood, but it was a sign in white and written on a wall, and it says, everything will be okay. And, I think for a long time, I used to think, yes, that is something that should be said when we're experiencing a lot of distress and when we're experiencing really urgent situations, stressful situations. But then I was thinking about it after I saw it, because there was something in me that was just like, felt some conflict around it. So I really reflected on that and was thinking about it. I thought, actually, probably the reason I feel so much conflict around this is because, everything won't be all right. We will be, but everything is not okay. Everything won't be okay. And like, how do we sort of extend ourselves in such a way where we can hold that reality while still taking care of ourselves, while still not giving up on each other and not giving up on us.
And I think that I really appreciate that acknowledgement of the discomfort and the dissonance of everything's going to be okay. And I think it's part of this conversation and this moment in time is to sit with that not sit with, but we have no choice but to sit
Yeah.
with the complexity of where we're at and the not knowing, and what do we do? What do we do to kind of carry ourselves through the not knowing, which is really our reality at every moment in time, but it's particularly acute right now. And
Yeah.
especially as, you know, with the loss of incomes and lives. And anyway, so I appreciate you bringing that complexity into our conversation, because there's definitely room for that here. So before we start with the 4 questions, I just wanted to invite everyone to come close, to feel our connection across time and space, and our collective intention to hold one another, to be in community, and to together kind of envisioning a way forward. And so thank you for being here. And I just invite everyone who's watching to just identify your bodies in space right now. Sometimes when we're out in worry and fear, just, you know, embracing your own body, maybe even feeling your own heartbeat for a moment, that rhythm, reliable rhythm. Putting your hands on your chest is one way just to bring ourselves back. Maybe even look at the walls around you and see where you are. Okay. All right. These conversations have the same 4 questions. And so I'll begin, Bunny, with the question of what cradles you?
Oh my gosh, what cradles me? Black women cradle me, honestly. There was there is a Black spiritualist on Instagram by the name of Juju Bae, and it's BAE. And she hosted a panel of like Black spiritualists and priestesses and healers and of all Black women and Black femmes, and called "We Gonna Be All Right," which is on YouTube. I can even send you the link for folks who might be interested.
Okay.
But it just was so inspiring to me. And at a time where I felt so groundless, watching that made me feel, it gave me a renewed sense of like feeling grounded in something, you know? And I feel like for a lot of us that do equity work, that do anti-oppression work, I think, you know, it's important for us to be able to embrace when we also are in struggle and when we're struggling with something. I feel like that can be difficult when, you know, you're used to being the person in the room who's leading. You're used to being the person in the room who's helping other people feel grounded. And so, you know, it's like the chicken or the egg. It's like, okay, well, who helps you feel grounded? What is grounding you? And as a person who is constantly offering others care, when do you get to receive it? You know, especially in a time like this, you know, I mean, not just during a pandemic, really any time, because it's not like we're more human during a pandemic than we are when there isn't one. We're just as human now as we were before this. So I think, and just as worthy of that sort of care and protection, and that I think acknowledgement of our labor. So for me, that's something that was very powerful for me. And it makes me think about, wow, like these communities of specifically of Black women that really, really make me feel supported and loved and protected. And that also reminds me, you know, what my calling is and what I've deemed my purpose to be.
I would think that that would be such a source of comfort and strength to you, you know, knowing that you're cradled by other Black women.
Yeah, for sure. It is. It's like exactly what I needed. That, and there's a nonprofit organization called Affinity Community Services that focuses specifically on providing services to Black LGBTQ plus folks here in Chicago, with a particular focus, with a particular centering of Black women, Black queer women. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they do office hours. So I think last Thursday, I missed the live office hour, but it was still up on Facebook, so I just watched the replay. And even though I wasn't there, like I wasn't there live, I felt like I was, like I felt like I had been in the space. I still felt supported. I still felt cared for. And these folks don't know what people are gonna watch this video, minutes, hours, months after the fact. But it was a really good feeling, to feel that sort of like, wow, this is my community, and there are people who are grieving here. Unfortunately, because of the kind of system that we live in, which is founded on structural racism, I have a very close proximity to Black people on the South Side of Chicago that have died, or Black people on the South Side of Chicago that are currently in the ICU fighting to survive. And I think to have shown up after the fact, to have watched that replay, and then to have listened to people talk about their grief. Like, these are people that I personally know, this person that I personally know. Oh, don't you remember this person? The DJ? Yeah. And it's like, oh yeah, she's not with us anymore. And seeing folks really be supportive of one another in those moments. And also be just like how Black women are. Just like, don't you be going outside with no protective cover over you, honey. Or like, when you come in the house, make sure you disinfect your clothes, put your clothes in a bag, disinfect your shoes, girl. And that for me was like, wow, that makes me feel really loved, like people care. So that was such a cradling experience for me, and such an inspiring experience for me.
I think there's something so comforting and cradling about being with people who see you as someone who has needs.
Yeah.
Who can hold both, like, you are this powerful being and you're human. And you need us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That authenticity, the both, that you're human. So it feels like what we're talking about today, it's about the complexity, the both, the and. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, the second question is, do you have something to offer that will help cradle us?
Really great. I love that question. Something to offer that will help to cradle the folks who are going to be watching this. I think there are two things. One is focused on sort of like how we're taking care of ourselves in relation to our boundaries. So it's like, what are we giving ourselves? And then what potentially do we have to contribute back into the community that has been giving to us? So that first thing is, I have a boundary work workbook that I made last year, which is on my site, boundarywork.com. It's a free download, and it's stuff that folks can work through in terms of how am I grounding myself in my boundaries. I'm not one of those people that's recreating a past offering, in a way of like, here's how to survive a pandemic, right? Like, I'm not a personal believer in that being something that can be dictated to people. But I do think that there are a lot of principles and ethics that remain the same. In times of high stress, right? We still want to be centering those who are most marginalized, who are most vulnerable. In urgent times and distressing times, it still is going to be our work. We're still going to want to be setting boundaries with other people, with institutions, right? We're still going to want to be setting boundaries with ourselves and our own internalization of what we have to be, or who we have to be, or how we're supposed to show up, versus who we are and who we'd like to be. And sort of like how we would like to offer sort of support to others and to ourselves. So that is one thing, is what are you offering to yourself? What are you giving to yourself in this time? And then the other is, for me personally, which I'm not sure if other folks are like this, I love astrology also. So I'm an Aries sun, Capricorn moon, Taurus rising. So
is it your birthday soon?
Oh, my birthday passed. My birthday was March 24th.
Oh.
I think it was like the second or third week of quarantine.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, March 24th was my birthday.
Happy belated.
Thank you. And so for me, I'm a worker bee. And I think that's my Capricorn moon. So I find that it helps me, even though I know some folks in the past have told me, no, like, you're stressed out. Why are you working? And it's like, because me being able to contribute something to community makes me feel really grounded in who I am as a person. It makes me feel like I'm responding to my own sort of like internal sense of my calling and my own internal sense of my purpose. So for others, it might be like, well, you're just like working all the time. And it's like, no, it's actually like, I have an idea, I create something, which doesn't necessarily mean that everything that I create is something that I share or something to be sold. Most things that I make are things that I make for myself, or it's something that I can go back to. I can chuckle to myself about something that I created, or I can read it back and think about the time in which I wrote something, what I was feeling in that moment, what I was experiencing. And it gives me a lot of, it makes me feel powerful when I'm able to do that. So I decided, because I was in this state of, how do I support my community? But also I'm not pushing myself to be doing consulting right now, because I know I'm not in that space yet. I'm giving myself time to really sit with where I am and how I'm feeling, and to sit with where my community is and how they're feeling. But I decided to start what I'm calling the Overnight Fund, specifically for equity and anti-oppression workers. And it's a fund that centers LGBTQ+, like Black and Brown equity and anti-oppression workers, who work at various intersections of identity and various intersections of power. And I decided to do that. It's based off of the actual name, the Overnight Fund, is based off of a poem by Naira Waheed, which goes along the lines of like, the world has ended for me many times, it begun again in the morning. And so when I think about those sort of pillars in our community, folks who do, anti-racism work, folks who do work in LGBTQ+ communities, folks who are like doing their very best to still be leaders in terms of like reminding us of like what our principles are, of our ethics, reminding us of like who our real, what our real purpose is in terms of like bringing about change in our worlds. I think a lot of those folks are ashamed to say that they need help and support. And I think for me, I ask the question, what does it mean to be the person who is constantly centering those who are most vulnerable, while being a person who's in that category of a vulnerable person, And I think sometimes it means that you're afraid to say, hey, you know what, I need help, because I think for fear of folks looking down on you, or for fear of folks thinking that you're not strong enough as a leader or as a teacher, as an educator, as a facilitator to withstand, right, apocalyptic like experiences or apocalyptic circumstances. And I'm saying that, of course, facetiously. And so for me, when I think about that, I thought, something that makes me feel grounded is, how do I give back to those folks who I know give so much? And so people can go to McKENSIEMACK.com to learn more about the Overnight Fund. People can also go to McKENSIEMACK.com to submit a request form. So far, what we've been doing primarily is offering people assistance with their rent, with their groceries, with paying their bills, with like really just like taking care of themselves. It's redistributing funds that we receive. So if folks are interested in that, they can go to McKENSIEMACK.com to find out more about it. And for those folks who might be watching this who are equity and anti-oppression workers, Black and Brown folks, LGBTQ+ folks who do that work, and who potentially are in need of support, please do go to that. Please go take care of yourself. Go fill out that form. We'll see how we can get you some support.
Thank you so much for that. So just to repeat back, what you're offering to cradle people, to offer the cradle, is both that reminder around boundaries, and so the boundary work workbook could be super helpful. And I'm really intrigued around boundary setting around institutions, and I've heard you say that before, but I think that's that's something that a lot of people haven't heard about before, what that means. And I also love that the cradle that you're offering is something so tangible and something so immediate to people who need support. And so thank you so much. So that's the overnight fund, and
Yeah.
I'll link to that in our notes. So thank you so much. The third question is there something that we could practice? Or is there a practice that anybody listening could go off and try or incorporate?
Yeah. One of the practices I've been thinking about, and I think we started off with the outset, is the sort of "how are you doing" challenge, where when people have asked us or ask us how we are, and these are potentially people that we trust, because of course, folks that you don't trust, you're not gonna, most likely, you're not gonna want to be sharing your most intimate sort of feelings and experiences with those people. But then sometimes we do. I've had times where I was just like in such a distressing moment, and someone asked me how I was, and I was really honest, and I got support. And this wasn't somebody, and I never saw the person again, but in that moment they offered me care, and I really appreciated it. So for me, I think about that of like a practice of grounding ourselves in how we really are versus grounding ourselves or attempting to ground ourselves in what we think will make other people feel most comfortable with us, which is typically the go-to is everything is fine, I'm great, or it's a deflection. Oh, okay, I'm fine. How are you though? Like, what's going on with you?
Mm-hmm.
And we never really get that care that person is extending to us.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's how are you challenging that sort of internalization of perfectionism, that internalization of white supremacy, that internalization of patriarchy, which says you have to make yourself as small as possible. You have to make your pain as small as possible. And you have to minimize the ways in which you're having a very human response to like urgency to crisis, having a very human response to this pandemic, so that other people will feel more comfortable, or so there's more space for other folks who really have more social privilege and more social power than you do. And it's like, no, we actually don't need, we don't need to do. There's plenty of space for all of us to feel how we feel.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one of those practices, is even if it means, sometimes what I'll say to when I'm doing particular, because boundary work is separate from McKenzie MACK group, but when I'm doing work with my clients with boundary work specifically, a challenge that I've had them do, and many of them were like, this is very scary, I hate this, is I'll have them take out their phone on their own, not with me, not with anyone else, but privately in their own space. I have them take out their phone, open up their audio recorder, and I'll have them respond to a question. So recording their own voice. And so in this case, I would say, take out your phone, open up your audio recorder, and pretend as if someone has asked you how you are, and respond as honestly as possible. And then you stop the recording and then listen back to it.
Wow.
And ground yourself in that, in the honesty of that. I've had folks who've been like, no, I'm not doing that because I don't want to hear I don't want to hear me talking about how I feel, or that's scary to me, this idea of, even in my mind, even though I know no one else is here, no one else is on the receiving end, it's still very scary for me to think about being that honest with another person, even with somebody that I trust, about where I actually am, because I'm afraid of what they might think of me. But I think that when we sort of bound or even bind relationships according to fear, or we develop attachment with other people, and it's very founded in like us being afraid of what they think of us. We don't really get a chance to grow in that relationship, and they don't get a chance to grow in that relationship. It becomes a very superficial thing of like us always sort of performing something that we think that person needs, or performing something we think that person wants, without even really getting to know that person. And really knowing, like, actually, I have no idea. How would you respond if I said that I'm depressed? Like, would you stop calling me? Would you stop texting me? Would you stop being present for me? How would you respond if I said, actually, I have PTSD. And so I wake up in the middle of the night, especially during times like this, and I can't sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like sweaty and I'm stressed and I'm just like afraid, and if there are people in our life that we say that we trust, we cannot hold that and really be in that space with us and be present for us, right? And that's something else for us to really be thinking about. Like, where are my people then who can hold that? Because not everybody's going to be that person. That's okay. But if we don't really have community or people who can sort of and are willing to hold that for us in a spirit of care, in a spirit of equity and anti-oppression, in a spirit of justice. And we need those people. But I think it takes first giving ourselves permission to kind of be present in that way with ourselves.
That I love these questions because I'm so surprised by the answers. I mean, just the practice of authentically communicating how you are is an amazing and challenging practice. And so I appreciate the simplicity of it. And I also appreciate just how challenging it is even to name how we're doing to ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, just that recording,
Mm-hmm.
that naming thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Huge.
I think sometimes we think if we don't say it, then it won't be real. You know, but we know that white supremacy has been real for a long time. There's a lot of white people that refuse to even say those words, but it doesn't make it any less of a reality, you know, for Black and brown folks, for Indigenous folks, for Asian folks. It doesn't make it any less real. So I think, you know, the objective is not to, even when you did the activity with us, sort of at the outset of like grounding ourselves, I think it's always important to reiterate to people that the purpose of grounding is not to evade our feelings. It's not to escape who we are as people. It's not to escape being present in like our lives. The purpose of grounding is to feel our feelings more, right? To like face like ourselves. And it's not sort of like an activity that's focused on like deflecting away from how we're feeling, deflecting away from how we are. Because we need that confrontation. Like not all confrontation is a bad kind of confrontation. There's some really good confrontation. I personally, like I said, I'm an Aries sun. I love confrontation.
Bring it.
I'm like, you said what? So, I'm a lover of that confrontation. But even more so, what my favorite kind of confrontation is that confrontation with self. And the kind of confrontation that's built out of a desire for justice and for love and for caring. Because I find that still very difficult, still very uncomfortable. But it has a really powerful impact when we're able to see and really take note of the ways in which we have survived and thrived through very difficult times. There's a lot of folks who are saying now, well, we've never seen a pandemic before. And it's like, well, define we. Because not having access to healthcare, not being listened to by your government, respected, or having your life honored or your land honored by your government, not having people consider your illness or your sickness or your pain to be real has been a daily lived experience for a lot of people, right? For most of the world, we're folks who live in poverty, either at or below the poverty line, right? So I'm like, okay, define we when you say that. And then secondly, define when we think about sort of this idea of like, well, we haven't experienced this before. And it's like, yes, like in terms of like this very moment and its uniqueness at its very unique intersections. Yes, that is true. And also at the same time, individually, we have experienced a lot. And I feel like sometimes when a distressing moment happens or there's some sort of like a national emergency in this case, then I think that we can be very quick to forget all the things that came before and all the things that we've survived and had to thrive through before. And it's like we treat ourselves, it's like we infantilize ourselves and we're like, oh, well, I've not dealt with something like this, or like, you know, I've not dealt with stress like this, or I've not dealt with, you know, urgency like this. And it's like, well, more than likely, you know, if you have some sort of a marginalized identity, you have, but there's also a high likelihood that you've disassociated yourself from that. And by disassociating, you no longer even give yourself credit for having survived it. Or you put that on someone else. You're like, well, I got through that because I had community. And it's like, yes, that's great that you know, are honoring your community. That's great. Your community was there to support you. But, you know, my love, at the end of the day, you got through that because of you, because of your will, right? Because of your hope, because of your commitment to sort of surviving through it and thriving on the other side of it, or thriving even within it. So for me, when I think about that practice, I think, okay, how am I thinking about the past experiences that I've had, things that I have gotten through? How am I crediting myself for that? while still embracing, of course, there's so much uncertainty. There are things that we don't know how this is going to turn out, how this is going to conclude. We don't know like what this continued quarantine is going to look like. But we don't have to have all the answers to know that we're worthy of being present in our feeling, right? We don't have to have all the answers to know that we're worthy of being cared for, being protected, right, by ourselves and by other people. But I think the main thing that we have to remember is that we don't give up. We don't give up on each other. We don't give up on ourselves.
So much truth telling here, McKenzie, and encouragement to be truth tellers. I really appreciate that. Thank you. The final question is, do you have a blessing or a vision for the collective?
Oh, yes. I think when I mentioned earlier about that poem, which is, ever since I've read it, has really been something that has sat with me in my own spirit, around this idea of seeing the world end many times, you know, and then also being there to see it begin again. And I think for me, my sort of vision for the collective would be us really being present in this moment, and holding this sort of shared vision for seeing a world anew, you know, no matter how long that takes. I'm a very, very fervent believer in the idea that you don't get the revolution you want. You do get a revolution, but you don't always get the revolution that you want. Sometimes you get something on the other end that you just completely did not expect, right? But you're still affecting change. You're still bringing about goodness in the world. You're still bringing about kindness and justice. But it's not always the way that you envision it. So for me, it would be knowing that we have a lot of individual visions around how we would like to see the world change, right? That on the other end of that there's some sort of a beautiful amalgamation of all those sort of shared visions, right? That still is like seeing a world anew. But I think even seeing it in terms that we don't even have the capacity yet, I think, to make a vision as a community of people. I think for me also in terms of like, that vision for me would be what's happening now. So it's not just like what we're waiting to have happen. But I think for me, what is happening now would mean wanting to see people really stand firm in their values and in their principles, and to stand firm in the boundaries that they have already set with institutions, the boundaries they're setting, the boundaries they're setting with our government, right? So for me, even when I think about it in terms of like anti-racism, for example, where it's like, well, actually that work doesn't end. You know, and yes, people are stressed. That doesn't make racism okay, right? That's not like okay, well, you know, you've been through a lot. So being racist is totally fine now, right? Being xenophobic is totally fine now or acceptable. But it's like, no, you hold firm to your boundaries well within your capacity, but you're still letting people know, hey, this won't be tolerated. And yes, you know, I woke up at 3 p.m. today and I'm disheveled and my house is not clean. I haven't taken a shower for 2 days. And also racism is not okay. And I will not tolerate that kind of behavior from you. I won't tolerate that kind of sentiment from you, or from my community, because it's not acceptable. So for me, it's having people see themselves as holding firm to their values and holding firm to their principles, even in times of great distress, even in times of urgency. And then potentially being able to come on the other end to be present in that, to say, you know, a lot of things were uncertain at that time. A lot of things weren't okay. And yet still, I was still grounded in my commitment to like community care. I was still grounded in my commitment to justice, and I did not waver. Or if I did at any time, you know, I self-corrected. I made my apologies to whoever I had to make my apologies to. I'm working on that consistently working on myself. But I did not, you know, give up. And that for me is really, I feel like one of the most important things that we can do.
And it to me, you know, that's one thing that can hold us steady, you know, that unwavering connection to our values and our work and the collective good and justice, that can be so anchoring it is anchoring.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And I appreciate the suggestion that all of those things still matter even more so when we're stressed or afraid, that we need to hold those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
We need to hold each other in place.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of this. I appreciate your work. I appreciate who you are.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. And so before we go, again, I just want to draw everyone close. I want us to feel that connection, that each of our well-being is bound up with each other's. And just really want to express my appreciation for you, Benny, and whoever listens to our conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Bye.